We're here again.
We are, and I'm so excited. I've been looking forward to this.
Me too, for months as it was percolating. Because, you and I talked about getting on a show together again 6 months ago, 5 months ago. And we had you on the show 14 months ago. So, and heard your story then, which was just powerful. And so today, really want to hear about 52 Weeks of Me and how you started it and how it grew and grew in your audience, and then you morphed it into the podcast and how that's gone. And as you know, I'm pretty passionate about the podcast too. Had a little hand in there. So yeah, if you just want to talk about how you got to start.
Sure. So, really quick background because I think it's important to set the context. Where did 52 Weeks of Me come from? I went to an executive coach, as many of us do, and I went there for all the right reasons, but different from the reason I left. And the right reasons were I wanted to excel in business, I wanted to be more powerful with my team. And he
Mhm.
asked me three questions that changed my life. And the first question was, what's the negative internal dialogue in your head? The second
Mm.
question was, what does it all have in common? The answer was, it all started with I. And the
Mm.
third question, which was my aha moment, was, who validated it? And the answer, for anybody who's wondering, was nobody. I had
Interesting.
created that dialogue
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
So I went home that day, and as a recovering workaholic, as a recovering perfectionist, as a recovering overachiever, I had to do something about it.
Yeah.
I knew that dialogue, which I didn't even know existed, once you know, I really wanted to change. I
Mm.
had what I call my awareness. So the second step was acceptance. I had to accept that I had an imposter syndrome. I had to accept that I had this negative dialogue. And ultimately, I had to move to my third A, which is action. So I went
Mm.
home and I decided I was going to take on a journey. 52 Weeks of Me is what I called it. But really, what it was I was going to perform a single act of self care every week for 52 weeks.
Mm.
Now, the blog really started as a way to hold me accountable. I
Sure.
wanted to
Yeah.
have an accountability partner. We hear about it with fitness, we hear about it with nutrition. And this was a journey I knew I couldn't take alone, and I didn't want an out. If I had that blog, it would ensure that not only did I do the self care act every week, but that I would continue for the full 52 weeks. So that was really the journey and the start and where it came from and how it all started.
Yeah. Yeah. And a building accountability partner, many accountability partners. Yeah. Over time. That's powerful.
Actually, so something that is worth sharing that I again didn't know when it started, but I now have others who have started their own journey, 52 weeks of moi, transformation X, whatever it's called. That
Hmm.
now it really, as you just said, it's not just my journey. And I do, as much as I enjoy the acts I'm performing for by myself, I'm
Hmm.
also enjoying hearing the stories and watching the journeys of others because it's as motivational. They always say surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. And this is
Yeah.
a perfect example of that because the more I see and hear from others, the more I'm encouraged to keep going.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just like on our show here, I'm so inspired by you, so inspired by all of the women that we interview. It keeps me going too. So it is a little bit of accountability. Yeah. So then you got into it and you started writing the blogs, and take me through some of the content and even just some of the individual thoughts that you had while you were doing that moved the thing forward.
Sure. Let's start with the end in mind, which is what originally intended as a time management activity. So some of the content were things such as shopping spree, such
Hmm.
as date night, time with the girls, actual physical things where I was just making myself a priority and doing things
Hmm.
that I enjoyed. What I learned probably right around when I came on the show originally was that this wasn't a time management activity at all. It was actually a positive mindset activity.
Oh,
So
interesting.
some of the content and some of my favorite weeks were be vulnerable. Work smarter,
Mm.
not harder. Ask for help. It's okay to not be okay. These are
Yeah.
type of things where you can say traditionally, that's not what the media sells you to have self-care be.
No.
No,
No.
it's not. This is self-care to almost the self-care plus. This is a
Hmm.
redefined self-care reimagined. And really, the content for me, those weeks, the weeks where I truly was vulnerable and I allowed myself to get deep into my head and do
Hmm.
things that I traditionally hadn't done or that don't naturally come to me. That was where the real
Mm.
transformation and the real change started to happen.
It's taking a risk. It's taking a huge risk. In fact, I remember you and I were chatting about there was one weekend when, well, I think it was actually coming up to your show, where you had a moderate emergency in your family, and you were debating, do I share this? Do I put this on the blog? And ultimately, you did. It was really powerful. It's powerful for me, and I know a lot of your audience got back to you and said, "Whoa." So that, yeah, gosh, that vulnerability, and you nailed it. And I know it was. So I'm just guessing that was a risk. What got you? What helped you take that risk? I mean, it's one thing to go from, it's time management. You know, there's not a heck of a lot of risk there. It's good, but it doesn't really engage people. What took you to that level?
It was just the journey and the feeling good. The more I put my oxygen mask on, and I know that is so overused and so cliche, but I refer to it as the watering of the garden. I am a gardener. It's actually one of the posts. I do like having time for gardening, just like baking sourdough bread was one of the posts. But if we go back to the garden for a minute, and
Hmm.
if you are a gardener or you're not a gardener, think about it. You plant seeds and you walk away. Do you expect those seeds to grow? Probably not. You need to
Hmm.
fertilize them. You need to water them. You need to prune them. You need to pick the fruit off of them so they don't become too heavy. You need to weed around the beds. There
Hmm.
is activities that have to happen to ensure that garden grows. So it's that analogy of put your own oxygen mask on, but you can't pour from an empty cup. And so because I was taking care of myself, I was feeding myself with that positivity and with those acts, I was becoming or on the way to being my best self. And by being my best self, I was actually growing in confidence. So it
Hmm.
wasn't viewed as a risk. It was, I just stopped living in the I could do, should do, would do. I stopped living in the what other people think of me or what other people will worry about. And I really started to live the life I wanted to live. And I
Hmm.
think that's what it is because naturally, and this is a little bit vulnerable as well, but the other day one of my guests posted about your identity and what is your identity was the question, and we
Hmm.
often answer that by our roles.
Hmm.
I am a mother, I am a wife, a sister, I am a work, etc. But identity is not just what we do, but who we are. And I think it was that journey to really find myself and build an identity outside of my roles that
Hmm.
gave me the confidence to take on more vulnerability and to be more transparent and authentic.
And so, would you say that the vulnerability and the authenticity were integral to growing, the natural next step?
100%. If I was still living in the what other people think or what people would say if I did it, I wouldn't have been here. That was the
Yeah.
shell I had put up is I was always trying to be what other people wanted me to be, and that worry that I can't speak in public. I can't do a live event. I can't be on YouTube. That was always this doubt that I had internally, and it was once I removed that layer and I changed my can't do's to my can
Hmm.
do's that
Hmm.
it wasn't a risk I was taking. It was the confidence that I can do it. And it was equally that point about my story can help others. So I really looked at it as an opportunity for those to see where, and this is one of my favorite cliche statements, but I went from living to work to working to live.
I know
And
you've mentioned that to me before. Yeah.
It's one of my favorites because so far, again, going back to the identity is I was a working mom. That was it. I worked and I mothered, but I wasn't Jacklyn Osborne. And that
Hmm.
shift from living to working to live really allowed me to live my life. And by living my life, I learned that I am a person who is compassionate, who helps others, who loves socialization and human connection and conversations with people such as yourself. And hopefully, we do talk about the transition from the blog to the podcast because I'd like to share that story. But
Absolutely.
all those things just started to come naturally, and it
Hmm.
didn't feel like I had to hide it. As again, I could be my authentic self.
So who are you?
So going back to what I said earlier is I am a compassionate person who loves helping others
Okay.
and who enjoys um, being active and with my kids and truly finding life and having fun.
How does that, thank you for, I just wanted to make sure I got it. How does that impact your work? And not talking about other things within not talking about the external. Who are you therefore at work now that you've made that transition?
For so long I worried that it would impact me negatively, but the best example would be a week from the blog, which is work smarter not harder. And I genuinely believe the answer to that question is I'm better because
Hmm.
I am my true self. So we talk about the state of flow a lot. I think it was episode 3.
Hmm.
And it's amazing if you actually get into a state of flow, the productivity and the delivery and the content you can produce in even 10 minutes, but an hour, versus if you're in this state of force where you're battling yourself, you're spending more time worrying and contradicting and thinking than delivering. So, because
Hmm.
I've been able to shift from force to flow, I am able to deliver. Like, actually, a good example of this is not work example, but as the podcast, someone said to me, how do you have time to write? And the answer was the old Jacklyn would have needed a quiet room with nobody around, with a clear schedule, with everything being perfect to write.
Right. Yeah.
Now, where do I write? Where do I do my session outlines? In a car, on a train, in a plane, in my in on my couch, anywhere. My canvas is my phone and is the notes
Hmm.
pad, and I will write anywhere. And even if it's 10 minutes, I've been learning about this type 1, type 2 activity. And type 1 activities are the activities that are instant gratification. Scrolling Facebook, they're quick, they come to you. Type 2
Right.
are the ones that actually give you, it's what you want, but take harder to get to. So for me, if I have a 10-minute break, instead of going and picking up my phone and scrolling Facebook or LinkedIn, I will sit and start writing. Because I am okay not finishing. I know I'll get 3 really great questions and I can bang it out really quickly. So, coming back to your question, I think it's that productivity by working smarter, not harder, has made me better because my creativity is flowing, my confidence is flowing, and I find myself in that state of flow way more than I ever did before.
Interesting. So, would you to I just want to make sure that I'm hearing what you're saying. Would you say that the harder is externally driven? Other people's expectations, your perception of other people's expectations or organizational expectations, and that the smarter is it's driven by you. It's internally coming out.
100%. And there is a really great image I've seen just about the future of work. And it talks about the first one, I don't remember, there's like 10 points on it, but the first one talks about from 9 to 5 to work anywhere, anytime.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think that's the difference is this first one in, first one out. For many years, and if any of my former colleagues are on, I was the first one in and the last one out. I made my career by hard working. When people ask me, how did you get so successful? It was hard work and delivery, without a
Yeah.
doubt. And I'm not saying that's a bad strategy,
No, it's part of it.
it's part of it. But now that same level of hard work wouldn't sustain. It's what got me to the low point of November 2019.
Yeah.
I was pouring from an empty cup. I was working too hard, too much, and I didn't have enough, which then put me to the point where my delivery was actually suffering. There is a bell curve around too much work is actually counterproductive. And that's the state I was at. So it's finding that balance between that working hard and working smarter, because once you do accept that it is not longer hours, it's maximizing the hours you do have, that really I think we can find this pure productivity.
And I would say a lot of people know that equation, but don't understand what has to happen internally so that you're driven by you. You're driven by your values. And so that's one of the things that I'm so proud of that you've done through your blog and through the show. So you're giving people the awareness and resources, information and understanding through these stories of other people for how that can happen, and they can get to that point that you are at where you're motivated internally. And so it is a natural upflow that you're now working with your motivations and your priorities and your values driving that ability for higher capacity. I think that's just absolutely phenomenal, and it makes me think of, well, the question is, would you say that now your relationships are stronger?
It's funny because right before you asked that question, I was thinking I was going to quote a former guest, actually, a guest we just released this week, Tracy Fox. We
Mhm.
talked about finding happiness, and she talks about that everything in her coaching is about relationships, whether it's relationship with self, which I will talk about, or it's relationship with others, or relationship with your job, or relationship with your higher self. And I
Hmm.
do think that's key, is that if you can't love yourself, how can you love others? How can you expect others to love you? So that relationship with myself is really the one that I'm investing in. It is the relationship that I am taking as much as, if not more, time with. It's not just about my relationship with my children, my relationship with work, or my husband, but it is my relationship with myself, because that's so important. That's really where we can, again, ensure we are not pouring from an empty cup. I mean, if we want another analogy, it's a bank account. if
Hmm.
you keep withdrawing money and you don't make any deposits, at one point you're going to have no money to withdraw. It's the exact same thing. And I'm ensuring that I'm always there. I want to keep the bank high so that when, whether it's myself or a child or someone needs me, there is money to be withdrawn.
Hmm. Hmm. That's powerful. Relationships are so just, I love that you're focused on the relationship with yourself and the way that you call that your relationship, because it's the metacognition. You're stepping outside and looking at yourself. You're stepping outside and looking at your thinking and how you approach things. And that reflectivity can be hard for many people. And so it's just beautiful the way that you say that. It makes me think of, within modern psychology and modern therapy, so clinical counseling and personal therapy, there's a growing, I would say, theory, which is pretty well founded because we have modern examples of it, but going back to small communities where your relationships, everybody's on top of everybody
Yeah.
else. It's all right there, which can be, there's problems to that. But it creates, because of that input and the people reflecting about you toward you and developing those skills, people are a lot healthier. There was a study done on first generation, so Mexican immigrants and their kids, and they found that solving for cultural um, lack of willingness to report on mental health, so pulling that out, which was a minimal piece, they found that the first generations coming in had almost no incidence of mental health issues, and they're in these 3 and 4 generation households, with tight communities. The second generation, the kids who enculturated into general American society, it's skyrocketed. And so that just ties right back in, I think, to you're talking about relationships with other people and how strong that can make you and bring healing and health to you. Um, does that resonate?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going now to COVID. clearly we're in COVID times, and the amount of mental health issues have skyrocketed, not just for adults, but for children. And think about it. There, and for me, one could say COVID was a silver lining, and hopefully others found a silver lining. But let's talk about the downside. Is for many months we were in our homes. Now, most of our homes, as you said, are not multi-generational, which means we were living with a very small population of people. We have limited
Mm.
social interaction. We have Zoom and other means, but it's not physical contact. So I think the best example and why what you said does resonate is I do think those communities, especially for kids, where young kids, their education in those early age is play, is socialization, is interaction. And if they're not having that socialization and interaction, it's hard. And I think that's a part of why we're seeing these large numbers in the mental health crisis, because
Mhm.
we are social human beings. We do need a community. We do need a support system. I don't want to give it away, but we have an upcoming guest. We have two guests actually that we're going to talk about communities and support system, and one have even
Yeah.
created a platform because it is so important. Just as one of my blog posts, which was Girls Night Out, I am planning on going on a trip with my friends. That is important to being our best self. We do need friends, and we do need to have conversations. We need to have a variety of conversations. Yes, we have conversations at work, we have conversations in the household with our spouse and our children, but we also have to have conversations outside of the household about anything and anything. Oh,
Yeah.
what does your diet look like? What are you doing tomorrow night? Those are all important to becoming our best self. So it absolutely
Mm.
resonates.
That's. I'm glad. I hope I was capturing what you were saying. Let's talk about. I mean, we'll come back to the blog, I think, at different points, but let's talk about the podcast.
Yeah, so 52 weeks were up just about a year ago. So it
Hmm.
started in November. It was Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah.
So I remember it well. So 52 weeks were up, and I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. And at some point, it wasn't just the act of self care, it was actually the act of writing. It almost became a journal. Or journaling, and that writing it down, that kind of concept of better out than in.
Hmm.
And it was actually in conversations with you and others who encouraged and motivated me to explore a podcast. And of
Hmm.
course, when I meet most of my guests, I'll introduce myself as I'm Jacklyn Osborne. I'm a recovering imposter. I'm a recovering workaholic. And I do that intentionally because when I was looking to shift to the podcast, all the Debbie Downer, as I call my negative self talk, came back.
Right back
You
up
won't,
again.
yeah,
Yeah.
you won't have any guests. You don't know how to do a podcast. You don't know how to do any of this. And thankfully, with friends and family, actually, this did come into a blog. A blog was asked for help. I went
Yeah.
to the people who did know. So, no, I didn't know how to create a graphic, but a very good friend of mine did. And I said, "Can you help me?" And
Yeah.
she said, "Yes." I didn't know how to do a podcast, but a very good friend of mine, Joshua, did. And I asked him for help. And here we are. And
Yeah.
thank you so much, walked me through every step of the process. And I was just like a kid in a candy store, learning and absorbing and shadowing. And here we are. I think we just released episode 8. We actually
Amazing.
just hit 750 views, which I have no idea if that's good or bad, but
We're
I'm
figuring that out.
but I'm excited about it. So we are live. We've released it, and that journey through the imposter, and again, coming back to what I said earlier, but I'll say it again, my 3 A's, the awareness, acceptance, and action. I
Mm.
had the awareness that I was having negative self-talk. I had the acceptance that thank you. I appreciate it. I understand there is a risk, but I'm going to keep going. And I had the action, which was putting down the steps in terms of securing the logo, securing the technical skills and the guest and recording. And it has all paid off.
It's been amazing. Yeah. And such a privilege to work with you on that. And a kick in the pants. Really, really was. Um, and because of that, because I had that window there, I remember right in the beginning, you having those thoughts, the negative thoughts. They were, and just like you said, they were coming back up again. But the way that you handled it, the way that you processed those feelings was amazing. And you went from the idea, but trepidation about so many factors involved, because starting a podcast is complex. There's a lot that goes into it. To it wasn't long before you were tackling things that came up and enthusiastic about it, and say, gosh, well, here's some things that are, stressful, but here's some things that I absolutely love about doing this. And seeing that transition was pretty amazing. And reflecting back on my transition, taking things on, it's, oh, somebody's coming through. That's
Sorry
okay.
about
That's okay. Not a big deal. But reflecting on my process and how I transitioned forward, I think it just took me a lot longer. And because I've dealt with some of those same things internally, and that internal negative dialogue, done a lot of work on that. But I was impressed, and I reflected on your process the year prior and how that impacted that. So yeah, talk about some of the guests you've had.
Yeah, well, first, before I do, I just want to say something because I
Sure.
remember this like it was yesterday, and I'm wondering if you do as well. That fear of going from blog to podcast. I wrote a blog post, what's called "What's Next," and it was
Mhm.
really my introduction to the podcast. And I remember sending it to you the day it was out, and it was that better out than in. It was like just writing again, because writing is what I had known. I was never known as a
Right.
writer, but after 52 weeks, which was actually like 60 weeks, writing has felt comfortable. That's
Sure.
where I felt in my zone. So by writing the post, what's next, and letting the world know the podcast was coming was so cathartic. And it was so
Mm.
it made it real. And so I remember, because I remember the act of writing it, I remember doing it, and now that blog actually has over 2,000 views, which for us was very high. We average
It's
about
pretty
200
awesome.
to 500 on a
Sure.
normal release. So 2,000 was really high.
Yeah.
And that's what I use now to secure new guests. So the transition to your next question was, tell us about some of your guests. I just found it so something that I was so scared to do, and I used as a crutch, was using the blog as a mechanism to transition to the podcast, has actually now been the mechanism by which I introduce myself. So I just
Hmm.
wanted to share that story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Switching to some of our guests, let's talk about some that we have had. So the the podcast, if I was to do a recap, is really around bridging the gap between what I used to say is those who do and those who teach. And I now don't say that anymore, because what I've learned is 95% of the guests have actually done and now teach. So now I basically
Hmm.
say it is that bridging the gap between those that are on the journey at any state. So the
Yeah.
journey to that authentic living their best selves. So meaning we have had guests who are personal trainers. We have had guests who are stress management experts. We have had guests who are coaches. We have
Mm-hmm.
had guests who are not experts at all, but who are simply individuals like you and I who are on the journey
On the journey.
themselves.
Yeah.
And that episode is actually has one of our highest numbers. So it's crazy that the difference. We also had one around some more new and emerging trends and microdosing.
Mm-hmm.
We have had a guest on happiness. We've had a guest who made a transition from corporate America to the life of basically meditative surrendering,
Mm-hmm.
and he just gave it all away to find themselves. So we really have a gamut of guests, and coming up we have so many. We have authors, we have extremely well known individuals, and then again just the individuals who have been through the journey. So I'm really trying to keep it real with a good combination of that variety of that journey, and anybody and anywhere on it.
And I think what I've noticed in the episodes that I've listened to, which I feel pretty good about getting a good smattering of them, is that sometimes when you've had these guests who are better known, and I know this will be true with your guests who are coming up, who are extremely well known, they're people. and it's that story that engages so powerfully, just like yours does. That's why we're talking about it now. um, and it goes back to those relationships. When you do these shows, you're showing a type of relationality with your guest, and that's powerful. That's modeling, right? um, who are some of your favorites?
Just again, sorry, I keep wanting to answer different questions because you got
That's
me
okay. Yeah, go
thinking
for it.
in your question around this living and acting in fear. So, one of the things I just want to be very transparent on is when I do reach out to those more well known recited, I'm scared. I'm very scared, even to simply ask them to be on the be on the show as a
Mhm.
guest. And I simply say, what's the worst that can happen? And there's something Brene Brown says, who I did ask to be on and unfortunately has not come back to me, but that's okay.
That's okay.
But anyway, she says something when she went to do a speech is someone told her that everybody in the audience is just fathers and everyone has their own lives. And that's something that I think about is that when I will ask them, and then going back to your question, is when they come on, no matter who they are, we're all people. We all have
Yeah.
stories. We all
Yeah.
have good. We all have bad. We all have learnings, and most of us have aha moments. It's really
Mhm.
around how we take those aha moments. Actually, a guest I just met this morning for the very first time as our initial intro said
Mhm.
to me is what this year has taught me, that if I stayed in that state, which he called his midlife crisis, and he was like, and I was good at it. He's like, I was good at sitting in bed until 11, 12 o'clock. He's like, but if I continued that, I wouldn't have what I have now. So
Yeah.
it's really being able to, again, that awareness and the acceptance and the action is that knowing when bad things happen, we need to kind of get the tough love to note that it's the hard things that are going to get us through it and get us out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that reflectivity when it comes. So, just full disclosure, at times when I've gone through difficult things, I've had a tendency to blame,
Mm.
to put off. I mean, surely everybody involved has responsibility, you know, um, but off putting off my kind of my responsibility, you know, to because it can be scary to reflect. What did I do that was challenging for other people? How did I influence this in a bad way? Can be scary unless you've done that work. Unless you are more centered in who you are and motivated from internally. And I like what you said, that shifts from I statements. I mean, we're talking about I, and self-care of the I, but it shifts your product shifts from what you can do to survive to what you can do to bless other people and lift other people up. And I think when you're in those situations where more so, and I'm imagining this is true for you, when you go through challenging situations, you're not afraid so much of how things are going to be perceived about you and how they're going to affect you. You're still thinking, what can I do to learn? What can I do to benefit other people in this situation? And that's powerful. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, yeah. It makes me think about the recovering perfectionist. And I'll always be, to a degree, a perfectionist. Actually, just recently, one of my guests has a different personality test. So, of course, I went and did it. And
Yeah.
I've just been through the work. If anyone's going to say the work, I've done the work. Yet I'm still the wolf. I'm still the type A perfectionist because deep down, that is who I am.
Yeah.
So, we actually talked about this. One of the things that I feel is the greatest benefit and the greatest outcome of all of this is my ability to shift from responding to reacting. And
Mm.
normally, what you just said is if something bad were to be happening, my natural tendency, similar to yours, is to blame, to go to anger, upset. But it's because we don't know how to process emotions. So we just default to what's easy, which is that finger pointing. So now, and this is I learned this recently, is as much as I am getting better at reacting and not just responding, there are still times when I respond. When something, especially
Mm.
with my children, and they're at risk or something goes wrong, I get scared. And you know what? I giving myself permission to be a human and to get scared. And I'm also giving myself permission to respond in those situations. But here's the thing is I've now learned that the awareness of, ooh, you know what? I just responded and I responded in a way that I would prefer not to. So I have the maturity to say, sorry, I've made a mistake, self correct. Just because you've done it on the outset, because that's the natural or the immediate response,
Yeah.
I can self correct and I say, sorry, my bad. I reacted and I didn't intend to. I apologize. I would like to take some time to process. And more importantly, my new favorite saying, I probably need to write a blog on this, is I let it go fast.
Ah,
So
I
if
remember you
and
saying that.
when
Yeah.
I make a mistake, it's okay. We're human. We all make mistakes, but let it go fast. Don't
Yeah.
allow that mistake. And in this case, my responding and blaming, and it's often to my husband or to someone in an inner circle because it's what's comfortable to you. Don't eat myself up because I made the mistake. So let it go fast so that I can come back to living in the present, so I can come back to surrendering to the, not what the should do and the could do, but what is. So that's a
Mm.
new one that I kind of heard in what you were saying, is that we're perfectly imperfect. We're No one is perfect. We're gonna make mistakes, and as long as we acknowledge it's okay to make mistakes, but more importantly, it's important to come back, give yourself forgiveness, and come back and move forward.
Hmm. You touched on this, but it's partly separating your identity from your actions.
Correct.
Yeah, you can if it's your identity, if your actions are your identity and you make a mistake, shame, because now it's I am the mistake rather than I made a mistake. I can separate it from myself, look at it, and it's not because the shame is not driving it. And Brene Brown talks about this. Then you are looking at the effect on other people and how that can change. So yeah,
Indeed. Actually, our last guest, Tracy Fox, again, maybe because it's fresh in mind, I just listened to it. We literally just released it on Thursday.
yeah.
But she talks about that most of us look for happiness through consequences, through our actions. And we're waiting for someone to tell us we look pretty. We're waiting for someone to open the door for us. Those are the actions that, and we're going to be up and down. But she says the true way of finding happiness is through peace of mind. And I
Hmm.
think that is so powerful, because if we're really able to let go of consequences, as you just said, the actions, bad things happen to good people. It does not mean they're not good people. It meant bad things happen. And
Hmm.
if we allow that bad thing to affect our mood and our overall happiness and our future state, shame on us. We
Hmm.
really need to come back to let that bad thing go. Bad things happen, and come back to how we can change it moving forward.
Amen. That's powerful. What's your vision for the future of the show?
Right now, keep doing what we're doing.
Hmm.
I'd love to say we did just create a group. So we
Hmm.
talked about communities. I'm still new to that, so I'm not going to tell you it's the most active group, but trying to get that more active. And really, to answer your point, this vision of the future, I'd love it just to be a community. I really would like it to be that 52 weeks of us.
Hmm.
I know it's called 52 Weeks of Me, but there is not me, Jacklyn Osborne. That's not me, listener one, me, listener two, me, listener three, but it is now 52 weeks of me as the
Us.
community,
Yeah.
and as the us. So that's really what's next, is how I can transition, whether you're a guest, a listener, a future guest, a to be guest, a past guest, a present guest, all those things, just creating this community and being there for one another,
Hmm.
through the ups and the downs. That's really what I'm looking to get to next.
How do we join the community? How can we participate?
Sure, sure. Everyone can find me. So I am an individual on LinkedIn, Jacklyn Osborne, but there is a private group that you can message me. It's 52 Weeks of Me is the group there. It's 52, the number.
Hmm.
So feel free to send us a message. You can also email me at 52 weeks of me, but spelled out
Right.
FIFTYTWO, 52 weeks of me at Gmail.
Yeah.
And I can also add you then. So you can find me, Jacklyn Osborne, on LinkedIn, or you can email me 52 weeks of me at gmail.com. And I would love to add you. And of course, please like and subscribe to the podcast. You can
Hmm.
find us on all of the platforms: Apple, Google, Stitcher, Spotify. I'm probably missing them, but we're on every one of them.
That's fabulous. And I will put that link to 52 Weeks of Me, the group, and I'll tag you in a comment, so people
Perfect.
can either log on there or get a hold of you via DM. And you have a phenomenal capacity for monitoring your DMs and getting back to people. I've just always been surprised at that because I get inundated and I'm like, ah! So thank you. Um,
Oh no, thank you. And again, this really would not be possible without you. So I owe the podcast. I owe so much to you. I genuinely thank you for the little hard love nudge in the very beginning and all the work to get those first few episodes out the door. Literally, Joshua was editing, listening to at least the first five. So
yeah.
truly a huge part of our journey.
Jacklyn, it was so much fun. It was just thank you and a privilege. I appreciate it. Thanks for your time today. I know you've got to go. You've got a busy day ahead of you, and we'll be posting this again once it's available on YouTube for viewing forever. We'll stick this back out there in a couple of days and put it into the comments again how to get a hold of Jacklyn for 52 Weeks of Me. Jacklyn, have a wonderful day. Thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you.